Right now is the most dangerous time that there has ever been to be trans in the UK. Hello, it's Mabel again. Welcome back to my channel. Today, I just thought, in light with some pretty worrying news there is right now in the UK going on about a current legal case for trans people in the UK and our protections, I just thought I'd do quite a long overdue video about how trans people have been since the latest general election. So I did do a video about the general election on the results day pretty much. I think it was the 5th of July. By all means, do see that video where I go about what the win would mean for politics in the UK, but also whether it was a win for trans people or not. And at the time, I was worried about some stuff with the Labour government, but I think overall it was a sigh of relief for Labour to step in there to lead a new government. And I think the hope for a lot of trans people in the UK has just been that the Labour government would leave us alone. Unfortunately, this isn't what is taking place. So since the Labour government have taken control in July, we've had puberty blocker bans become permanent. There's now a legal court case which will decide with a trans woman with a gender recognition certificate there, a legal document that says they should have the rights of any other woman, any other female, whether that is the case or not. That's going on in the High Courts right now in the UK. And there's just a number of different things that have happened. Hate crime rates are still increasing, and it just doesn't seem to be changing at any stage right now. It doesn't seem to be getting any better. So let's get right into this for today. The first thing that I did want to talk about is the High Court case that's going on right now, which is to define what a woman is. This has already been attempted, I want to say. This has already been a battle that's been fought and lost so far by a transphobic group called Sex Matters and some beneficiaries of their cause. So that was in the Scottish courts originally, and it's now been appealed to the High Courts there. And it's an argument that a transgender woman with a gender recognition certificate, so again, a legal piece of paperwork to confirm that they are a woman, they've went through all of the legal loopholes and holes to jump through to become a woman in the legal aspect, if they would still be, in fact, legally a man, and they wouldn't be allowed to access same-sex spaces, such as women's changing rooms. They wouldn't be allowed in women's wards, for example, on hospitals. They wouldn't be allowed to access crisis centres if they were suffering from domestic violence or any other issues there. So this is an extremely important thing to discuss. Not because trans people are dangerous, like Sex Matters and other organisations are trying to say, but if this goes in a way that trans people or trans women, because it doesn't really affect trans men, they're allowed to have all of their protections, but if trans women were said that they don't have the legal protections of women in the Equality Act, despite getting a gender recognition certificate even, then that leaves about... There's only been 1,000 of these certificates released since they became part of the Gender Recognition 2004 Act. Only 1,000 trans people have these certificates in the UK, and there's an approximate estimate that there's 262,000 trans people in the UK. So even before the court case even takes place, to say that if it went in our favour, to say if only trans women with a GRC had the legal protections, because it's kind of been ran on the assumption that any trans woman has the protections of a woman right now, that would effectively already there, even if it's the optimistic outcome there, that would already be removing the rights or the assumed rights of 261 approximately 1,000 trans people in the UK, to say that they don't have the legal rights and protections of the sex that they are living as, or the gender that they are living as. And that alone really is terrible. That alone is already removing the rights again from hundreds of thousands of people there. And that's assuming that it would go our way. That's assuming that trans women with a GRC, gender recognition certificate, would be seen as women there, and that they can keep the protections that they have been protected by since 2010. So, of course, it's terrible, really, and this isn't the first time that this has came up since the Labour government. In my last video that we talked about on Results Day, it was found out that earlier that week, Keir Starmer did say that trans women with gender recognition certificates shouldn't be allowed to access women's toilets or women or female-only spaces. So right off the bat, we were kind of hoping again that they would leave us alone, the Labour Party, but it's through a High Court appeal there, not necessarily through Labour's actions, it's already the case that we're being targeted. The BBC wrote one article about this case there, about defining what a woman is, and for the second time now in this, it's just disgusting, the article there. It doesn't mention any trans people at all. It just mentions the defence for trans people as activists, and it goes through a number of different specialists from Sex Matters and such who are against trans people who are allowed to talk in the article. So it's already extremely biased. But in this article, they pose the hypothetical situation that a cisgender man would be able to get a GRC, a gender recognition certificate, as a woman, and would then be allowed to go into same-sex spaces as a same-sex attracted woman, as a lesbian trans woman, and then be allowed to prey on other women. And does that only 1,000 trans people in the UK have this certificate out of 260,000? Does that not indicate how hard it is to actually get one of these certificates? And the BBC still decided to release that. The BBC still wants to try and lead that narrative, and that's not the first time that the BBC have talked about trans women predating on other women as lesbians, or on lesbians in general. There, they released another horrific article that they refused to apologise about that exact situation before, and the fact that the media in the UK can talk about this stuff without getting told off, without complaints being written or having any action for, that puts a huge target on trans people's backs. It's accusing us of being predators, essentially. It's absolutely horrific that's being said right now. And again, but this is whilst the court case is going on. This is before it's even been decided yet. I hope that, of course, because it's already been prevented in the Scottish courts before being taken up by the High Court, I really do hope that this does have the same loss there, and it's just an amount of wasted money from Sex Matters and their wealthy benefactors such as J.K. Rowling, who donated about £70,000 towards this cause to be able to appeal this to the High Court. Hopefully, again, it does go wrong, but even if it is in support of trans people and their case, their precedent they're trying to start does go wrong, what about all the trans women that don't have GRCs? Does that mean that we're not allowed to use changing rooms? Is that something that's still going to be enforced? And we just don't know, really, but that does seem to be the interpretation already that is being pointed out there. And again, it's terrifying. It's not easy to get a gender recognition certificate. You have to have evidence of at least 2 years of living as your identified gender. That means you'd have to transition onwards of 2 years at least. And that's living completely in the female role. That's having your name changed, that being with your work, that being through your doctors and such. I don't think you need to take HRT, but you definitely need to speak to specialists. It takes years, and again, the BBC think that they can write an article saying that at least there's the possibility that a man could get that certificate to then be able to predate on vulnerable women. Men don't need to do that. They're already able to predate on women and get sentences of crimes of as low as 3 years. Whereas if you damage a statue in this country, if you damage Margaret Thatcher's statue, you could get up to 7 years in prison. Women already aren't protected by men at this stage. It's completely ridiculous. It's farcical that we are having to have this discussion there, this discussion in court about a GRC, about trans people that make less than 5% of the population. We're a tiny minority, and that we're still being coloured as being dangerous in some way, either by having the protections of a woman and being able to use the toilets that align with our gender there, compared to not being forced to use the men's toilets and being huger amounts of danger ourselves. The next part of this video that I wanted to go over was I was a bit worried to just lump this all together as a segment about West Streeting, but it is going to feature mainly on this politician now, the Health Secretary for the new Labour government. Now, he used to have a reasonably good track record, I'd like to say. He's a member of the LGBT community. He's to my knowledge, he's got a male partner, so to my knowledge, I believe he's gay or he could be bisexual. And previously, again, he would say quite proudly that trans women are women, trans men are men. But over the past couple of years or so, where he's been getting more traction, really, he's becoming more well known, especially now he is the health secretary. He seems to be going down a different path. So shortly before the election, he admitted to being wrong about trans women being women, and saying that these days he wouldn't say that, which again is already disappointing. That it's already throwing us under the bus there. He's talked about plans to have trans women treated in different wards or separate rooms to women's wards in NHS hospitals. I believe that was in April, so there's not really been much talk of that since the election. But again, it's fairly concerning considering, of course, the last place you want to be in a hospital is being treated in the middle of a hallway, and he seems to think there's enough rooms to fit trans women exclusively, whilst other people are being treated in hallways in hospitals right now. So that's very concerning too, but that's not really been talked about in the new government, so we'll have to come to that to another video. Unfortunately, a big thing that has happened in the last few months is that just before the election, there was something released called the CAS Review. We could do a whole video about the CAS Review and its implications for younger trans people. But from the CAS Review there itself, it's hard not to talk about because it's so biased against trans people, but it's being used to ban puberty blockers, for example, and go over other recommendations for younger trans people and their treatments. And unfortunately from this, there was a ban on puberty blockers to be used for trans people. This doesn't include a ban on the same medications when used for precoccus puberties there, when puberty starts too early and it needs to be stopped to make sure that bone growth plates aren't being disrupted or anything like that at all. It's just a ban for trans people there, and it was temporarily set to be a ban until September of 2024, but Labour from going in did extend this ban to November, and they've extended it again. Actually, it was extended again, a temporary ban from the 6th of November. It's been extended since from, and they have discussed plans to make this puberty blocker ban permanent. This is deeply distressing for younger trans people. Of course, for people that might not know, as a trans person, which you could be aware of for your body as early as 6 or 4 years old even, to go through puberty means that your body is being forcibly changed into, or to look like the gender, the biological sex that you do not identify as. So this is an extremely distressing time for trans people. And the only really relief that you could have, understandably, because some young people do change their mind, would be puberty blockers. This stops the masculinization or the feminization of the body temporarily, so that it gives these young people to make up their minds to decide whether they are trans or not trans, and then after reaching adulthood, after going above 18 years or more, they can then, again, if they've realised they're not trans, they can just stop the puberty blockers and their normal puberty will continue. Or it can then allow them to have the foundations there without being extremely distressed, but to then go on to cross-sex hormones, so estrogen for women, testosterone for boys, and it leads to significantly better outcomes, because if you've not already been masculinized, if your voice, like my voice, hasn't already been deepened by testosterone because your puberty's been blocked, it leads to a far better outcome when you do then transition. So it's been, since they first been used, really, since the 70s or so, it's been held as the gold standard for trans care, which we've had in the UK, again, since the 70s or so, and other European countries. And suddenly, from a cast review, again, which is really hard to talk about because it was so biased against trans people with the studies they chosen, and only UK studies, not international studies, they found that this was suddenly not the best way to go, and that it was in fact, now some media people have been saying forever that this has been a great experiment on young people, but ultimately it was the decision that puberty blockers would be banned. And it was only going to be a temporary ban, but Labour now do want to make this permanent. Already, in a way, they are making it a permanent ban because they just keep on changing and renewing the temporary extension. To make that temporary extension permanent, they need to lay that out in Parliament, so they need to go through a parliamentary procedure, which is why they keep on just making the temporary ban go on and on and on. And yeah, again, it's extremely distressing for trans people. It's led to a huge spike in trans people, younger trans people. These are teenagers, these are kids who are calling mental health helplines, who are considering suicide, who are self-harming. Already things that are hugely prevalent in the trans community, in the younger trans community especially, because of how hard it is to access help. It's after the door being closed on the main help that there could be that you could hope to get once you get through all the waiting lists, after that being stopped, the mental health crisis in the trans community is skyrocketing. And it's disgusting. It really does feel like with the government, first through the Conservative government, but now through the Labour government, it really does feel like they just can't see the level of suffering that they are seeing. And the cast review, whilst it was only a review into the healthcare systems for trans people up to the age of 17, stroke going on to 18, it's actually been cited for the stopping of medication or surgery referrals for people older than this. So in a Scottish gender identity clinic called the Chalmers GIC, since October, the referrals from 18 to 25-year-olds for surgery, again, gender-affirming surgery, have been paused. Their referrals have been stopped, so they're not going through the year-long waiting lists there are anyway. They're just stopped until they turn age 25. And the reason they're citing is the cast review. So they're citing a review only for trans kids, basically, for trans adults, that they're arguing, being younger adults, that they've not said this yet, they've just cited the cast review, but saying that they're not ready to go through with their transition, which again is completely ridiculous. And the Labour government shouldn't be letting this happen, but it is happening right now under their care. And it's ridiculous. Imagine telling an 18-year-old if they started university that all of a sudden their mind wasn't ready, their brain wasn't ready for that adult decision, that permanent adult decision, and they were kicked out of university. That's what's going on with their surgery referrals being stopped. I'm 22 right now, and I'm hoping to get put on a waiting list, and my transition that's been going on since I was 17 could be stopped, with hoping to eventually get a surgery referral, because it should, fingers crossed, fingers bloody crossed, that it does happen on waiting lists before I turn 25. But at the same time, again, as a 22-year-old, I'm currently applying for my first ever mortgage to purchase my first home. Imagine if I stopped paying that mortgage and said, well, you can't kick me out of this property, you can't repossess my home. I'm under the age of 25. My brain wasn't ready yet to make this decision, so I'm not going to pay the loan that I've taken out, and I'm just going to keep this house. It's ridiculous. And again, that's completely what they're saying there. They're trying to just patronise and infantilise people my age, or 18 or older, into saying that they're not ready, which isn't even what the cast review was for. But again, it's completely ridiculous, this. It's had to be looked into in an extremely complex way, because they wouldn't even tell patients of the Chalmers GIC that this was happening. I believe MPs or councillors had to get involved, from patients writing to them about their referrals to see what was going on, because they just weren't hearing anything. So again, it's already leading into this new government. It's only 4 or 5 month-year-old government at this stage. It's already leading into tremendous consequences there, and we don't even know how bad it's going to get. This is just the start of the government. But from us hoping that it was at least a sigh of relief for trans people, it's taking a complete U-turn. It feels like things are getting so much worse under the Labour government as things were getting in the Tory party. It just feels like it's not changing. Lastly, one thing that I did want to talk about, which isn't necessarily a bad thing at this stage, it's more of an update in a way to something that's been going on or promised for several years now, several prime ministers, is a ban on conversion therapy. So a conversion therapy ban in the UK has been a really dramatic piece of proposed legislation. It's been promised since, I believe, if I get this right, it's been promised since Theresa May that there would be a ban on conversion therapy, and it's just been kicked in the long grass since. So with Boris Johnson, since then he said that he'd ban conversion therapy, and then he said he'd ban conversion therapy for lesbians, gays and bisexuals, but he wouldn't ban conversion therapy for transgender people, which caused a very large outcry. Liz Truss, I believe Liz Truss, to be honest, she wasn't in power for a very long time, so she might have talked about conversion therapy. We shouldn't really count her as a prime minister. Rishi Sunak, he said that there would be a ban on conversion therapy, but again, before leaving, he too, from the Conservative Party, did not ban conversion therapy. There has been an update in the new Labour government, which is that there is now a proposed piece of legislation. So this did make it, as I mentioned in the King's speech for this year. That was back in July when Labour was newly elected. So it's a draft piece of legislation right now. It's called the Conversion Practices Bill. The draft, as far as I'm aware, it hasn't actually been released yet to be criticised and then finalised. So it's still very early days, but a conversion therapy ban is slowly making its way forward in the UK. And that will include transgender people, unlike what Boris Johnson said, where it'd only be for the LGBT community, which he said in his proposed ban, which he never did, which is fantastic there. It's a slight bit of improvement. I'm a bit interested in how a conversion therapy ban would fit into all of this, because in one way of arguing is if you were to ban puberty blockers, which are already being considered to be permanently banned, then surely for a child that would be helping or aiming to convert them to be cisgender. So that would be a form of conversion therapy. The Cass review also talks about a type of therapy called exploratory therapy, which is where you're strictly not allowed to directly experiment with your gender. So you can't wear different clothes of the different gender. You can't explore with makeup, for example, or anything like that, which are normal things that young trans women in particular would explore with. But instead, it's a very oppressive form of therapy where you would have to talk about how you would feel if you'd be allowed to be a member of the different gender. So if you would be allowed to wear different clothes, for example, and other forms of different roles in society. So trying to find any research about exploratory therapy for trans people in particular, it feels like torture in a way. You're saying that they're not allowed to do something, they're not allowed to properly explore or discover themselves or whatever, which trans people do normally before coming out in the first place, especially as kids. And they're saying that they're not allowed to do that, but they have to talk about how good or bad or how it would feel if they did do that. So yeah, I'd be quite interested to see if they managed to do a conversion therapy ban and included trans people in it, how that would compete maybe or go against some of what's been talked about in the Cass review and what could be implemented from that. It's interesting to think about there. But ultimately, with a conversion therapy ban, that is looking to go into the right direction. In trying to research for this, because there's not been much news about it in the past few months, I have been able to find some stuff online. So one thing by the Christian Institute trying to argue that if there was a conversion therapy ban, it would limit religious freedoms, with trying to teach that being trans or being gay or same-sex attracted is a sin. Whereas the Church of England has actually said that there's no place in a modern society for a conversion therapy ban. And there's plenty of other religious countries like Brazil who have already banned conversion therapy. So that's one argument. Interestingly, I found a Telegraph article. It's behind a paywall, so I couldn't read it, but it says that this was from October. So there seems to be something going on about the conversion therapy ban, even if it could be people afraid of it. And it was saying that Labour's proposed conversion therapy ban, including trans people, could risk criminalising parents who don't want their children to transition. And that kind of it kind of feels like saying, is the sky blue, or the sky is blue? It's like, well, obviously it would criminalise a parent who's trying to stop their child being trans, the same way it would hopefully stop a child from being abused, punished, or referred to services, conversion therapy services, to try and stop them from being gay. Obviously that would be hopefully criminalising or punishing in some way there, trying to prevent that child from being harmed. So yeah, I've not been able to read that full article, but there seems to be some stuff going on in the woodwork behind the scenes. That was only in the middle of October, both of those things, so the Christian Institute thing I saw and that Telegraph article. So perhaps there's something going on underground, maybe in the gender critical or transphobic spheres there, trying to lobby against this bill, but we'll have to see how that turns out, because we just don't know what's going on with the conversion therapy ban and if it is going to finally happen through this government as promised. And I think for now, really, in this video, we have run through all of the updates that there have been since July. So I'll leave that there for today that I'm recording this. So again, sorry it's been a bit of a shouty video today, but it is some stuff that needs to be talked about. It really is the most dangerous time to be trans in the UK right now. Please do like and share this video to anyone else who might want to be updated about this. Feel free to comment maybe about your own experiences as a trans person in the UK, and I hope you will stay safe. Thank you. Goodbye for now.